Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be talking about one of my all-time favorite games in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, 5 years after its initial release. And to prepare for this video, I did do a full playthrough, including every side quest in the main game, Hearts of Stone, and Blood and Wine. And while this video will primarily focus on the main game, I will also talk about the 2 DLCs very briefly at the end of this video. So it had actually been 2 years since I last played The Witcher 3 to this extent, and re-experiencing the game made me remember just how much I respect this game, but it also reminded me how many annoying little bits there are within this game as well. I mean, The Witcher 3 to me is still one of the greatest game experience I've ever had from an open world standpoint, from a narrative standpoint, from a world building and lore standpoint. And those things are able to overcome the gameplay missteps that I feel like this game has and still be one of my all-time favorite games. Now, I was someone who had never experienced anything to do with the Witcher series coming into my first playthrough, and while I do have extensive knowledge about the world and lore of the Witcher series now, and do probably love the games more so because of that, I do think The Witcher 3 does a good job at making it feel like you don't need to play the previous games or read the previous books or anything. I mean, there's plenty of exposition throughout that is naturally ingrained into the game to make it more accommodating towards new players. Now let's talk about the open world in The Witcher 3, which has 5 regions. Start off the game in a relatively small one called White Orchard, which is merely there as a prologue to the game and is structured pretty similarly to how the bigger open worlds are. Now, probably the main region of the game is Velen, which does also include Novigrad and Oxenfurt, the 2 biggest cities in the game. But this is also where the majority of the game takes place and is filled with just a lot of woods and swamps and just random villages. To me, I just always found it aesthetically pretty bland, but I do like both of the cities within it. We have Skellige, which is a radical departure from Velen, where it's mostly a sea-based world where there's multiple large islands around the mainland, and a lot of the world here is filled with mountains and snowy areas, which, while I do love the aesthetic of this area, I don't love playing in it as it gets annoying trying to navigate around the mountain and getting where you need to go. There are smaller regions in the game as well, with Vizima, which you only get to play within the Royal Palace, so there isn't much there. And we do have Kaer Morhen, which comprises of the Witcher Fortress and some random mountain and wood sections outside of it, which is again kind of bland and is only there for some main story missions. So at the end of the day, not much there either. But something I should talk about is one of my major annoyances with The Witcher 3, and that's how Geralt navigates around the world, how he controls. I mean, he controls like a tank with pretty stiff movements. Whenever you try to jump or try to climb things, it feels really janky, and Geralt dies so easily from fall damage, so missing a jump or trying to climb something the game won't let you climb can get really annoying, especially when, at least on the PS4, I mean, loading times in this game are ridiculous, especially when loading from a previous save. Horse gameplay in this game is also really janky, where Roach constantly gets stuck on minuscule things, and most of the time I just decide to run to wherever I need to go, as by the time I get Roach unstuck, I mean, it would have been just quicker to run. I might as well talk about fast travel now as well, where like other games, you can only fast travel locations that you've already been to, where once you get close enough to a fast travel post, you unlock that location. But the annoying thing about it is that you can only fast travel from a fast travel post as well, meaning you have to find a fast travel location for fast traveling to another one. It's so inconvenient. Like, why can't I just fast travel from anywhere? I think that's something that Assassin's Creed does pretty well, where once you synchronize a viewpoint, you can fast travel there from any point, and I feel like that's the way fast travel should work in most games. Now let's talk about the combat system, which has your typical light and heavy attacks, and it all works fine. The melee combat in this game looks very smooth, very natural, though I will say that the crossbow, essentially the range combat in the game, is very janky. And overall, I just try to avoid it whenever possible. The only real time to use it is when your enemies are in the air. You also have signs, which are these magical abilities that you can use. I rarely use Yrden or Quen, though there are times where those things become helpful. I don't use Axii in combat, but it does help you in conversations where it helps you resolve matters peacefully. Ard is a sign that you use most in the main game, as you use it to blow away debris and open new pathways, and you're forced to use it multiple times within the main story. And finally, we have Igni, which is the one I personally use the most. I use it all the time in combat, as it stuns the enemies, but also does a little bit of damage to them as well. So that's the one that I personally use. So as an action RPG, The Witcher 3 does have a massive inventory system and a crafting system that, to be honest, I never really focused on until my most recent playthrough. I mean, I usually just selected whatever piece of equipment had the highest stats out of the ones I was given throughout the main quest. I never really crafted anything outside of the main story, but on my most recent playthrough, I made sure that I was keeping up with the equipment, crafting and using Witcher gear at my first opportunity, crafting better potions, and just blew my mind just how much more there was to this game that I personally never experienced beforehand. Despite having already put like 300 hours into the game and playing the game 6 or 7 times before this. I guess I can talk about New Game Plus in The Witcher 3 as well, which my most recent playthrough wasn't a New Game Plus, but I have done it a couple times in the past, and to be honest, I never liked it. I mean, I just don't like what it fundamentally does, where everything is automatically level scaled up by like 25 levels, and I actually find New Game Plus to be more difficult than the base game. I mean, it goes against everything I personally want in a New Game Plus, where when I'm playing New Game Plus, I just want to replay the story as quickly as possible without needing to take the time to level up or find new gear. I mean, I think Assassin's Creed Origins does this perfectly, but here in The Witcher, I just find it really annoying. Let's talk about side quests, which The Witcher 3 is usually recognized as having high quality side quests that are just as good as the main quest, and for the most part I do agree. A lot of the side quests that are connected to the main story are really great extensions of the main story, with quests like The Last Wish or the Triss storyline in Novigrad or Return to Crookback Bog. I mean, there are plenty of really strong side quests here. You do also get your generic kind of just run-the-mill, like sort of shoehorned in there side quests, like the Fist of Fury quests, which are all just fist fights. The Witcher contracts are really repetitive to me, as they mostly comprise of meeting up with the guy who created the contract, finding where the monster had been in the past, following the trail, and then killing it, and then returning to get your reward. I mean, I just found that really dull after a while. I mean, especially because there's plenty of contracts within the main game, so it does get repetitive. I did like how you can get quests through random encounters on the map. It really helps with the world building, but to be honest, it is kind of a pain from a completionist sort of standpoint. And while we're on side content, I might as well talk about Gwent, and I really, really love Gwent. I mean, if you don't know what it is, obviously it's the card game within the game, and it's a relatively simple card game. Kind of reminded me of a more complicated version of Black and White from the Genius, if you know what that is. I had fun building up my Northern Realms deck and using numerous spies and the Siege Master leader card to almost win pretty much every game. But the problem that I had is that I decided to do the collect them all side quests, which requires you to get every Gwent card in the game, and that was such a pain because a major part of that mission is you having to get these random drops from NPCs. So you had to continuously play Gwent with these NPCs over and over and over and over and over again, literally 50 times. You have to do it 50 times with 50 different NPCs, and that just wasn't fun. So now let's talk about the main campaign of the game, the structure of the game, and through this we'll also talk about the main narrative as well. So the game starts off with a decently long prologue, which comprises of Geralt looking for Yennefer, and along the way he accepts a contract to kill a griffin, which is a nice little intro to the world and a lot of the systems within the game. But after the prologue is complete, we then get the main task of the game, which is finding Ciri. And I really love how the game is structured here, where you have to look for clues in Velen, Novigrad, and Skellige. Through those, you get a bulk of the game, meeting a different set of characters in each area, and technically you can do them in any order you choose. Mind you, there is some level gating a bit, especially with Skellige. But on my most recent playthrough with doing all the side quests, I was able to level up to the point where I actually did Skellige first, then Novigrad, then Velen. Now, as I said, based on the level of the quest, Velen is supposed to be done first, and Velen is split into two storylines, Crookback Bog and the Bloody Baron. In the Crookback Bog storyline, you come across Keira Metz, one of my favorite side characters in the game, and you first have to learn about the Witches of Crookback Bog. You encounter Wild Hunt for a little while. I remember having a lot of difficulty with that section when I initially played the game. And Crookback Bog itself is just a section that, to be honest, I never particularly cared for. Not a big fan of swampy sort of areas in games. Not a big fan for witches just in general. And I just find that entire questline just so depressing to play through. But then we get to the Bloody Baron storyline, which I personally find fantastic. I mean, the Baron is probably one of the most complex side characters in any piece of media. And while this questline does have that really dumb goat herding mission, I do consider this one of the more memorable storylines in the game, where you slowly piece together like what happened with the Baron and his family. After that, we get to Novigrad, which out of the three questlines here, I do feel like the Novigrad one is a bit slower for me. I mean, we do get to meet some great characters like Dijkstra, Priscilla, Zoltan, eventually Dandelion. We do meet up with Triss, and if I'm being honest, I never loved Triss as a character. I do feel like Yennefer is a much better fit for Geralt's character. I feel like her voice acting is just kind of mediocre, but again, I've never played the previous 2 Witcher games, so for me, I wasn't as connected to Triss coming into this. I do love the Plays the Thing. That's a great mission. I mean, Count Reuven's Treasure is pretty fun as well. The bulk of the Novigrad questline here is the Get Junior quest, and I just found that one to be particularly slow. Where you have to go to his hideouts, try to look for him, and then go to Oxenfurt and then meet Vernon Roach and Radovid and like all this stuff. It's like I just found that to be kind of slower, and that's why, again, for me, the Novigrad storyline is probably my least favorite out of the 3, but it's still not bad. Obviously, it's still pretty good. And finally, we get Skellige, which is probably my favorite out of the 3. I mean, it's the shortest of the 3 by a significant amount, but that also means it lacks filler. And again, I love Yennefer as a character, and a lot of this section of the game focuses on her dynamic with Geralt. I love the Ciri mission in this section as well, where unlike the other Ciri missions, which are very action-based, this one's a lot more lax. You kind of get to know some of these characters a bit more. I love the side quest missions within this section as well, where you get to pick the ruler of Skellige, and I feel like this quest line was a lot more character-based than the other 2, and it probably is the most important quest line of the bunch, as it shows what occurs to Ciri immediately before meeting back up with her. After this, we get a string of back-to-back story-focused missions, starting up with Ugly Baby, which again is a very character-based mission where you meet up with the Witchers. And while I don't love the individual quests within the quest line, as there is a lot of filler here where the only purpose of these missions is getting to know some of these other characters, and I do love these characters like Vesemir, Eskel, and Lambert, but these missions do feel like they were constructed just for that, and because that, it does get kind of annoying to play. But this leads to the Isle of Mists, which I love from a narrative perspective, but I hate this mission gameplay wise. I mean, it starts off in the middle of nowhere in Skellige, so you have to sail there, and sailing in this game is terrible. I didn't even talk about that earlier. And then we have this set piece of a foggy island, and part of this is that you have to escort a dwarf back to the hut. That's really annoying. But again, narratively, we get the moment where Geralt and Ciri finally reunite, and it's such a fantastic moment, such a heartwarming moment. And that leads up to their arrival in Kaer Morhen, which is another really heartwarming moment. And for me, this is probably the most heartwarming moment of the entire game, and possibly in all of media. I mean, I don't know. I was truly happy just seeing Ciri like reunite with Vesemir and Yennefer. Again, the first time I played this game, I had never experienced anything in the Witcher series beforehand. So the fact that I was able to feel that and their connections within this scene, despite not actually knowing their real relationship beforehand, I do think that's very impressive. We do after I get the Battle of Kaer Morhen, which is definitely one of my favorite missions in all of gaming. I mean, it's really feels like a climatic moment for the game. I remember the first time I played the game, I thought this was the end. I thought it was like the suicide mission from Mass Effect 2. And seeing the death of Vesemir was such a great moment. It's your typical like mentor sacrifice sort of moment. It happens all across media. But again, obviously the game continues on. And we follow this up with another one of my favorite missions in Bald Mountain, where we get to see more of Geralt and Ciri's relationship. Now, I do think the beginning part of the mission is a bit slow, where you need to prove yourself to get up to the mountain. Like, who cares? But afterwards, we get 2 boss battles. Both of them are pretty fun, where Ciri faces off against the Crones. And I love the fight where Geralt takes on Emerith. But now we get to a weird section of the game where to me it feels like 100% the game should be done by now. But we get to some downtime in the quest's final preparations and battle preparations, which to me just felt like filler. Again, like final preparations is better. I mean, final preparations actually has some fun with it, has some great character moments with Ciri, you having to like reunite the members of the lodge. I did like Through Space and Time, where you go through all these really nice looking set pieces with Avallac'h. But battle preparations is just entirely pointless. There's really no point to this mission at all. And it's so weird that it comes right after final preparations. So why is there battle preparations after it? The Sunstone questline is quite possibly my least favorite mission in the entire game. as I said, it serves no narrative purpose. Like, yes, I know there technically is a reason they need it to bring out Aridin, but it's like that's not something that they needed to include in the narrative. But it's also just an annoying mission to play. I mean, it takes you to so many random locations in the middle of nowhere. Again, it includes some sailing. It's not fun to play. But after that, we're finally in the end game where we face off against the Wild Hunt again on thin ice, and it's good. I mean, the Aridin boss battle is pretty glitchy and never felt as satisfying as the Emerith boss battle for me, but I do think conceptually it's pretty solid. And again, I think the Battle of Kaer Morhen felt more climatic overall, but considering this is the end of Geralt's story, I do understand why they decided to extend the game a bit afterwards. But then we get the actual ending of the game where, based on your decisions with Ciri earlier in the game, you get one of 3 endings. There's the Ciri's dead ending, which I actually got the first time I played the game, and I was really disappointed at that. But the other 2 endings are a bit more satisfying for me. Ciri becoming a Witcher is obviously satisfying, but me personally, I've always preferred the Ciri becoming Empress ending. I do think the Ciri Witcher ending is more in line with Ciri's character beforehand, but I really do love the farewell scene between her and Geralt in the Empress ending, and for me, that's kind of why I put it as my favorite ending of the 3. I haven't really talked about Geralt as a character yet, and Geralt's one of my favorite protagonists in all of gaming. I mean, he is such a complex protagonist where he's supposed to be this really emotionless guy, but his actions prove that he has more heart than most of the other characters in the series. I do think the use of dialogue options in this game is really well done as well, where no matter what option you choose, it feels right. It never feels like Geralt is out of character, which happens so often with dialogue options in many other games. Again, one of my favorite aspects of the narrative here was watching Geralt's relationships with some of these other characters like Yen and Ciri. But another one of the narrative's greatest boons was its epic nature. It really felt like it was the ending to some grand narrative, and that is why I do excuse it a bit for overstaying its welcome after the Battle of Kaer Morhen. But that's it for the main story, but let's talk briefly about the DLC, starting with Hearts of Stone, which is obviously the smaller of the 2, and while I do consider its side content pretty underwhelming, I think its main story is much stronger than Blood and Wine's. I really love seeing Geralt deal with Gunthar O'Dim and Olgierd. I love the missions like Dead Man's Party, which is filled with humor, and Open Sesame, which felt like a Witcher heist mission. And while I do find like Scenes from a Marriage pretty annoying to play, I do think it makes Olgierd a much better character and probably the best side character from outside of the main game. Mishani was a bit shoehorned in there. I mean, it did feel like they just felt like they needed to add a love interest for Geralt. Every time she shows up in the main missions here outside of Dead Man's Party, it just feels like she was an afterthought. But I do like Hearts of Stone, but I will admit that I did get a bit worn out by it by the end of it. I mean, like, having played The Witcher 3 main story and doing every quest there and then doing the same thing for Hearts of Stone, it did get kind of annoying by the end of it. And finally, we have Blood and Wine, which narratively I think is fine. I mean, it's kind of goes all over the place for me. I feel like Hearts of Stone is more concise, but for me, Blood and Wine is more gameplay based, where I really loved replaying it actually. While I was like tired when replaying Hearts of Stone, Blood and Wine just felt like a new experience for me. Blood and Wine really feels like The Witcher 4. Like, it feels like its own entire game. I love Toussaint as a region. I mean, it feels like a fairy tale world with its really bright use of colors. It's the most visually impressive region to me by a mile. The side quests in Blood and Wine are also, for the most part, pretty strong. There is a bit of filler with things like getting all the Gwent cards, and again, mutations are things I didn't really focus on my first playthrough, and it is kind of overly complicated to me as a mechanic, as you need greater mutagens and also multiple ability points. Like, it's like, why do I need to do all this just to get like a tiny boost? But I did really love the inclusion of Corvo Bianco, a vineyard that Geralt owns and he can renovate, and I love the conclusion to this DLC where it really feels like a satisfying conclusion for Geralt, where he rests at the vineyard with either his love interest from the main game or Ciri or Dandelion based on whatever ending you got. And it does feel like a great way to end your Witcher 3 experience. There we go. Those are my opinions on The Witcher 3 5 years after its initial release. I still adore this game. It's still possibly my favorite game of all time, despite it having a bevy of flaws, as many things do. Now, I did recently buy Thronebreaker, The Witcher Tales, and that's a game I've actually never played before. It is something I would like to give a shot, and if I do, I might actually make a video on that in the future. I would also like to do a video on Season 1 of the Netflix show before Season 2 comes out, so stay tuned for that somewhere down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.